The grand hall shimmered with luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars from the ceiling, scattering golden light across polished marble floors. Expensive laughter floated through the air as silk gowns brushed against tailored suits. Yet amid all the elegance, there stood a small girl beside a massive black piano, barely tall enough to reach the keys. Her dress was simple, faded from too many washes. The soles of her shoes were worn thin, but her eyes, those eyes carried a quiet strength that didn't belong in a room built on vanity. The crowd noticed her and smirked, amused by her presence, as if she were an uninvited curiosity. Then came the voice that silenced the murmurs. "Let's see what you can do." "Little one," the host announced, his tone dripping with mockery. "Play something impressive. And if you truly move me—" He paused, letting the room lean in. "I'll take you home." Laughter erupted. To them, it was entertainment. To her, it was hope. Her name was Elena, and she was only 8 years old. Life had never been gentle with her. She had no memories of a mother's embrace or a father's protection. She grew up shifting between shelters and temporary, homes where kindness was rare and promises were easily broken. Hunger had been a familiar ache, loneliness her constant shadow. But music had saved her. Years ago in a forgotten community home, she had found an old piano with chipped keys and dust-coated strings. While others played with toys, Elena sat for hours, teaching herself how to turn pain into sound. Every note became a whisper of her story, every melody a silent cry for belonging. Now that same girl stood in a palace of wealth, her hands trembling above keys, worth more than everything she had ever owned. The man who had challenged her was Victor Hale, a billionaire admired for his success and feared for his arrogance. He had built an empire with ruthless ambition and wore confidence like armor. Compassion, he believed, was weakness. His words had been meant as a joke, a cruel spark to amuse his elite guests. But Elena didn't hear cruelty. She heard possibility. As she sat down, her feet barely touching the floor, fear wrapped around her chest. Her fingers pressed the first key and stumbled. A sharp, imperfect sound rang out. Someone laughed. Victor leaned back, satisfied. Then Elena closed her eyes. The room disappeared. She wasn't in a ballroom anymore. She was back in the quiet shelter, playing under flickering lights while the world slept. She let her heart guide her hands. The melody that followed was fragile, aching, and painfully honest. It spoke of empty nights, of longing for someone who would never leave. It carried sorrow, but also resilience, hope woven through heartbreak. The laughter died. Conversation froze mid-breath. The sound filled the room, raw and untrained, yet powerful in a way no polished performance ever could. Some notes trembled, some rhythms faltered, but the emotion was undeniable. Victor's smile vanished. Something tightened in his chest. Memories he had buried surged forward, his childhood home, the warmth of his late mother's piano echoing through empty hallways. He had erased that part of himself long ago, replacing it with ambition and control. Yet this child, with nothing to her name, had cracked open the walls he'd built. When the final note faded, silence fell heavy. No one dared clap. Elena opened her eyes slowly. Her heart pounded as she looked up at Victor, not as a beggar, not as a performer, but as a child asking to be seen. Victor stood. The applause erupted only after he did, but he didn't acknowledge the crowd. His gaze never left the girl. He walked toward her, every step stripping away his pride. Kneeling before her, he spoke softly, so softly only she could hear. "You didn't just play music," he said. "You reminded me what it means to feel." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. From that night forward, everything changed. The adoption process was long, complicated, and filled with scrutiny. Victor faced ridicule from his peers. Headlines mocked him. Friends questioned his sanity, but for the first time, none of it mattered. Elena struggled too. Nightmares haunted her. Trust didn't come easily. Love felt unfamiliar, dangerous even. But Victor remained patient, present, unwavering. Music stayed between them like a bridge. She played every day. Sometimes he sat beside her, clumsily pressing keys, laughing when it sounded wrong. Slowly, laughter replaced fear. Warmth replaced silence. Years passed. Victor discovered that success without love was emptiness. Elena learned that family isn't always born, it's chosen. Together, they rewrote each other's destinies. And the piano that once echoed loneliness now sang of home. The applause that night had felt endless, but applause fades quickly. What remained was reality. For Elena, the days following the gala felt unreal. She woke up in a quiet guest room inside Victor Hale's mansion, staring at a ceiling painted with soft clouds. For a moment, panic seized her chest. She thought she had dreamed it all, the piano, the lights, the man who had knelt before her. But then she heard music. Not perfect music, clumsy music. She slipped out of bed and followed the sound. Down the hallway until she reached a sunlit room filled with instruments. Victor sat at the piano, shoulders stiff, pressing keys with the seriousness of a man trying to solve an impossible puzzle. When he noticed her, he froze. "I woke you, didn't I?" Elena shook her head. "It sounds happy," she whispered. Victor smiled awkwardly. No one had ever described anything he did as happy. That morning marked the beginning of something fragile. The legal process began almost immediately, and it was brutal. Social workers arrived with clipboards and sharp eyes. Psychologists asked Elena questions she didn't know how to answer. Lawyers reminded Victor of the risks, the publicity, the responsibility. Headlines exploded. Billionaire loses his mind after charity gala. Is this adoption a publicity stunt? Victor read them all. Then he closed his phone and walked away. At night, Elena struggled. She hoarded food under her pillow. She flinched at raised voices. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. Victor noticed everything. One night, he found her sitting on the floor beside her bed, clutching her knees. "Are you afraid I'll send you away?" he asked gently. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Victor sat on the floor with her. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted, "but I do know how to keep promises." That was the first night she slept without nightmares. But the world outside wasn't as kind. At school, Elena felt different. Other children whispered about her clothes, her past, her sudden connection to wealth. She returned home one afternoon with tear-stained cheeks. Victor didn't ask questions. He simply placed her on the piano bench. "Play," he said. She did, and slowly the hurt drained out of her fingers. Weeks turned into months. Court hearings dragged on. Victor was forced to confront parts of himself he had ignored for decades: his temper, his distance, his fear of attachment. One evening, his lawyer warned him, "You can still walk away." Victor looked through the glass wall of his office at Elena, laughing as she tried to teach the housekeeper a melody. "There is no walking away," he said quietly. The judge's final ruling came on a rainy afternoon. Approved. Elena squeezed Victor's hand so tightly he thought his fingers might break. She finally had a home. Adoption did not erase the past. It challenged it. As Elena grew older, her questions grew deeper. She began to ask about her real parents, about why no one had fought for her before Victor. Victor never lied. "I don't know why they left," he told her one night, "but I know why I stayed." Still, doubt crept in. At 12, Elena overheard a conversation at a fundraiser. "She's lucky," someone said. "Without him, she'd be nothing." The words cut deeper than any insult before. That night, Elena didn't play the piano. She locked herself in her room. Victor stood outside the door for hours before speaking. "I didn't save you," he said through the wood. "You saved me." The door opened. Tears fell freely for both of them. Then came the accident. Victor collapsed during a board meeting. Stress, exhaustion, a heart pushed too far. Elena waited in a hospital corridor that smelled like fear, gripping a worn music notebook she had kept since the orphanage. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Uncertain outcomes. Long recovery. Elena sat beside his bed every day, playing softly on a portable keyboard. Nurses stopped to listen. Patients cried. Victor woke one morning to music and realized something terrifying. He needed her as much as she needed him.